Judges that we don't have. It would be very difficult covering the topics um, in these final three chapters with little ears to have to hear. I don't know. Some of this are just no getting around it delicately. It's horrific and so. Well, let's get started this morning. It's one thing. If you do verse by verse studies, you're going to come to stuff like it. There's commentators out there says you shouldn't even read 19, 20, and 21. It's too horrible. And it's in the Word of God, and it's there for a reason. We'll probably cover this so many times in the next few chapters you get sick of hearing it, but it covers the depravity of the human heart when we exclude God from our life. It happened to Israel. It's happening in our nation today, and if we don't guard our heart and watch, it'll happen to us. Anytime you move God out, something wicked and evil is going to move in. And so we'll cover it and see what we can make of it and then learn from it. Judges chapter 19, let's look at verse 1. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. So we're getting familiar with this phrase now in the book of Judges, not having a king. And I believe what the Bible's saying to us is not referring to a monarchy, a human king. It's not referring to, even though Israel had a strong desire to be like the other nations, which they didn't really have kings. They had dictators called kings. But Israel had a desire. That's what they wanted to be like the other nations. But what the Bible's telling us when we come across this phrase over and over here again in the book of Judges is that they've refused the rightful king, and that's God. They've not allowed him to rule and reign, to dictate the righteous ways for the people to follow, that he might bless them and bless them so abundantly. They don't want that. They want to look like the other nations, and what's resulted in is total chaos. And what we've seen through the book of Judges, and here's a pattern, and Pastor, here's a 3-point sermon. It began with conquest. It transformed into compromise, and it ended up in chaos.
Yes, amen.
And that's a pattern that's going to follow every time people choose to move away from God and not allow him to have the rule and the reign in their heart. And I think that's one of the reasons of the Lord's leading, but I was excited, I was attracted to doing a study through this book of Judges because it speaks so loudly to where we are today. I mean, we're in a completely lawless society, exactly like Israel was in. And I'm not talking about the criminals. I mean, we're not obeying no king. We're not obeying no president. We're not obeying the law, let alone obeying God. You think people are obeying the law today? Go on that highway and had Spokane drive the speed limit.
Yeah, no kidding.
People openly, blatantly disobeying and breaking the law, and when the law does catch them, all they're doing is slap them on the wrist and turn them loose, go out and create more chaos. And so I see America very much as being in a very parallel culture with Israel. We're not obeying man's law, not because we don't have people in positions of leadership in law, but nobody's obeying God's law. And so that's why when we turn the news on, it looks like total chaos taking place. And like I said, this chapter is kind of so horrific. Some commentators they've refused to comment on it, and some even suggest not to read it, but it's in God's Word, and it's there for a reason, and we're going to get through it here as delicately, I guess, is the way to put it, as we can. So it tells us about a Levite living in the territory, the land of Ephraim, and he's taken to himself a concubine. Now, it doesn't tell us that he's got a wife, but he's taken to himself a concubine. And so that makes her a legal mistress. She will be called a wife. He will be referred to as her husband, but she has no rights. None of a legal wife. She has no rights whatsoever. Any children that she bears him, remember Jephthah, they will have no rights, no claim to any inheritance. And basically, put it bluntly, what this boils down to is he's taken into himself a live-in for probably nothing more than his sexual satisfaction. And Christians make the mistake, we've talked about this before, Christians make the mistake of thinking in the Old Testament this was okay because it was so prevalent. It was a Canaanite practice, but it was never to be done or practiced with God's people. Yet Abraham did it, David did it, Solomon did it, countless others practice it. But show me any one person in all the Bible who participated in this that God blessed those unions or God blessed the children. He doesn't come right out and say, God condemned, God hated, God did. But when you look at his reactions to it, it speaks volumes of what he thought of it. And, we need to not make that mistake today of thinking, well, it's so prevalent, God must have winked at it or looked the other way. It's not so. Nothing but chaos and turmoil in those families that practiced it. And all the way into the New Testament, Matthew chapter 19, what Jesus say? From the very beginning, it was God's intent that marriage was to be one man, one woman. They would become one flesh. And there was nothing, no man, nothing was supposed to put that asunder or cause that to separate. And that's a big part of, what the problem is going on today is, how many generations of children have we had now that's had more than one set of parents and changed two, maybe three times? Different faiths and different views, and sadly, it's a crying shame. A lot of people will look. I don't even like the word step. I tried my very best to treat my wife's children just as good in the same way I treated my children, and still to this day I desire to have relationships with them and with their kids and what have you. But sadly, a lot of people look at stepchildren as something less. They'll treat them less than their children. They won't be as good, and that does a lot of damage to the psyche and the ego of kids growing up. Well, let's kind of start getting into this then. Look at verses 2 through 4. And his concubine played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. And her husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her, and to bring her again, having his servant with him, and a couple of asses. And she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And the father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodge there. No names are given to any of the characters in the account that we're looking at this morning, and it's not important. We're not looking at the character, but the conduct of these people. And oddly, I don't know how he got his information, but Josephus, the historian of antiquities of Israel, he specifically talks about this concubine, described her as being a very beautiful woman, but her and the Levite argued a lot, and it was over an argument, I guess big argument, that she left, went out, had an affair on him, and then ended up going back to her father's house. The Bible tells us for 4 whole months. So she was gone for 4 months, and I don't know, was it take 4 months for the Levite to get over the hurt that the affair caused, or just started missing her, or what? But he takes off to go reconcile with her. Now, in all the craziness and the chaos and nobody paying any mind to what God says, he's doing what should be happening when there's problems in a relationship. We've got this notion now today that if one spouse or the other commits adultery, it's an automatic thing. You got to go get divorced. The Bible says God hates divorce. Moses said, they was asking about divorce. Jesus told him Moses permitted only for that cause. And the reason why it was permitted, it was because of the hardness. And he talking to men here, because back then a woman couldn't file for divorce. It was because of the hardness of their heart, because of a unwillingness to forgive and to work on a relationship and to patch things up and make it right with God. And one of the things, if we don't get back to that, we're going to just continue to spiral down and down and down. Because the family and a family's relationship to God, that's the backbone of this nation. That's the strength of our country. And we just keep eroding and wearing that away with the breakdown of the family and divorce and all that's going on. I mean, seek counsel. There's help out there if both people are willing to work on it. Hank Williams said you got a license to fight, but work it out. Keep the marriage together if it's at all possible. Well, this Levite, he takes a couple of donkeys. He's thinking about her. He's not going to go down there and get her and make her walk back. Oh, he takes a couple of donkeys with him. That way she'll have a ride. The Bible tells us he wants to speak kindly to her. It's indicative of he's going to forgive her of her transgression and invite her to come back home with him. And I was kind of struck here at her father's reaction, how the Bible talks in detail here about how glad her father was to meet the Levite and to see him. And maybe that gladness was, my daughter, I mean, even though it's just a concubine, maybe he doesn't know that's all she is. My daughter's married to a Levite. I got a priest in my family. I mean, we've seen for the past couple of weeks how everybody in Israel's just kind of took to the rent-a-priest idea. As long as you got one somewhere, that's going to work. It's all good. Maybe he was glad at the thought of the idea of getting her out of his house. We don't know, but he certainly was bending over backwards to welcome this priest. And that's part of the Middle Eastern culture, and even still today. But God told him, you were strangers in a strange land. When strangers come into your land, and Israel kind of meant that, they took that to mean, well, we'll be hospitable towards our own. But that's not what God meant. Even when strangers come into your land, take them into your house, be hospitable to them, welcome them in. And the Bible tells us here that, the Levites stayed with him for 3 days. So now he's getting ready to go. He wants to leave and head back home. So let's pick this up, verses 5 down through 10. And it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together, for the damsel's father had said unto the man, be content, I pray thee, and tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. And when the man rose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him, therefore he lodged there again. And he rose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, and they did eat, both of them. And when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, Behold now, the day draweth toward evening. I pray you tarry all night, and behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. But the man would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed, and came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem. And there were with him 2 asses saddled. His concubine also was with him. Well, after 3 days, he's getting ready to go, but at the woman's father's urging, he ends up staying for 2 more days. And even on that last day, he stayed and not getting up early like you normally would think. You got a long journey to make. They got up, they stayed there all day, and they left late in the afternoon. And they came to, the Bible calls the name of the city Jebus. Define that, which is Jerusalem.
Yes.
So you need to know, at the time, Jebus was occupied by pagan people. It wouldn't be under Judah's, Israel control until King David conquers it. But it's a portion of, I'm going to get this wrong, the Amorite or the Ammonite, I don't remember exactly which one now, but it's a portion of those people known as the Jebusites. And so, they get there and it's getting to be almost nighttime, and the servant wants to stop, and the Levite again, he's kind of doing what's right here, making good, right decisions. He's like, no, it's not safe. We're not going to stay in this pagan city. It's late, I know. But let's just travel on till we get to Gibeah or Ramah. We will stay with our people, not in camp, and stay in this pagan city. So look in verses 11 now, 11 down through 15. And when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, and let us turn into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. And his master said unto him, We will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger, that is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. And he said unto his servant, Come and let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night, in Gibeah or in Ramah. And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. And they turned aside thither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he set him down in a street of the city, for there was no man that took them into his house to lodging. Well, like I said, so far it looks like the Levites making pretty good decisions, doing what's right. Wasn't going to be safe, he said, to stay in that pagan city, so they travel on to Gibeah, and they get there, and the Bible tells us it's dark now, nighttime, but they get Bible talks about to a street in Gibeah, and I kind of picture getting to a town square, getting to a prominent place in town where there might have been traffic coming and going, people walking by and seeing them. The Bible tells us that no one stopped to offer them lodging. And that should have been a red flag. Something's wrong here, because that was, I mean, we look at this as being so strange to have a stranger come up and knock on your door. Sure, come on in, spend the night, everything's great. But that's the way they did it then. In Middle East, and still to this day, there's a saying that you can even stay in the house of an enemy. As long as you're in their house, you're safe. They will guard and protect you with their life as long as you're a guest in their home. But it's not happening for these folks in Gibeah. The only thing I can draw or conclude from this is that the good people of Gibeah knew the danger these folks were in. And they did not want the responsibility of taking these strangers into their home and then turning around and having to face what's fixing to happen, having to take the responsibility of having these people in your house and possibly getting into a big fight or a big altercation, and maybe even having to give your life to try and protect them. So there was just no welcome wagon for these people in Gibeah. Like I said, that should have been a big red flag. Okay, let's get up and move on here. This something just isn't right. Now look in verses 16 now. We'll read down through verse 21. And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at even, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah. But the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said, Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? And he said unto him, We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, toward the side of Mount Ephraim. From thence am I, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah. But I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me to house. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaid, and for the young man, which is with thy servant. There is no want of anything. And the old man said, Peace be with thee. Howsoever, let all thy wants be upon me. Only lodge not in the street. So he brought him into his house, and gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet, and did eat and drink. So finally somebody comes by and offers some hospitality, but he's a stranger in the land. He's an Ephraimite as well, and he's had to come to Benjamin to find work. The Bible tells us as he's coming out of the field, finishing his work for the day, he's on his way home. He sees these people in the town square, and he strikes up a conversation with them. I'm assuming he's been there long enough to know the danger that these people are in, but he's not going to leave them out in the open. And so, even though the Levite tells him, we've got provender for our donkeys, we've got drink and food, we've got everything we need, we just don't have a place to lodge. And the old man says, come lodge with me. And whatever you need, let that be my responsibility. Come into my house, you're welcome. I will take care of you. Boy, does the story go downhill from here. Look at verses 22 down through 26. Now, as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, sons of Belial, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. Some of the other translations added carnally after that. That was their intent. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into mine house, do not this folly. Behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. But the men would not hearken to him, so the man, the Levite, took his concubine, and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her, and abused her all the night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. Then came the woman into the dawning of the day, and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was, till it was light. There's a lot of parallels in Judges 19 with Genesis 19.
Right.
But there's one big glaring exception. Genesis 19, we were looking at Sodom, a pagan city, whom Abraham's relative Lot had no business residing, but he was there. And a similar thing came when a couple of angels in human form came, and Lot invited them, and men came beating on the door at night, demanding they send them two men out that they may have sodomite relationships with them, know them carnally. And the angels saved the day for Lot and his family. But here, the men of the town come, and they beat on this old man's door, and that's not a polite knock. I mean, that's 3, 4, 5, 6 guys pounding on the door nonstop, really probably maybe even trying to break it down. And they're demanding to have what they want. I mean, he sent that young Levite guy out. And they made no bones about it. It was exactly what they wanted. They wanted to have sodomite relations with him, to know him carnally. And here we go. The old man tries to compromise with them. Oh, here's my maiden daughter, my virgin daughter. Here's my daughter and his concubine. Take them, and this phrase, do as you please. This is word for word exactly another phrase we keep seeing repeatedly in this book. They do with them as what seems right in your own eyes.
Right.
They refuse. No, they want the man. So the Levite here makes a bad choice. What happened to chivalry? What happened to a man standing up and defending his wife or his daughter
Right.
with his life if he had to give that up to defend them? I picture he grabs her, opens the door, and throws her out. That's the picture that's in my mind. And the horror, the Bible says, they raped and abused her. We don't know how many men it was. They abused this poor woman all night long. You know, one of the saddest things in the Old Testament is how Israel got so wrong by not listening to God but following the Canaanite pagan people, that how they got so wrong of the importance of the woman to the man. God never intended for a woman to just be an object of property, as something that's worthless or had no value. God never intended that to be that way. And thank God when Jesus got here, he began straightening all that out. Jesus talked to women. He healed women. He saved women. Many of his disciples and early servants in the church were, some of his closest friends were women. And he began showing the world that these aren't just objects of property. These aren't just here for you to do as you please, whatever you want with. They're important. They're human beings. And what Paul said, there's neither male nor female. We're all one in Christ. And one is just as important to Jesus as the other. And mankind, I guess, took a long time. But mankind had to learn that. But look at the horror that this poor woman went through that night. And here's what I picture. With the last bit of energy she had, she crawls back to the doorstep of the house that her husband is staying in. And she's not even the strength to get up or stand up. She's laying there on the ground with her hands clutching that doorstep, hanging on to it, having been through the most horrific nights imaginable. I've read some of the accounts of the Bataan Death March, of what the Japanese soldiers did and how they treated some of the American and Filipino women that were in that POW group. It's horrific. I mean, it boggles the mind to wonder how human being's heart and mind gets to such a place of depravity. But that's what happens when God's not there. the worst of the evil influences will take that place. And like I said, Sodom and Gomorrah, those were pagan people. These are Benjamites, people of God. This is the tribe of Israel. And they took horrible, horrible advantage of this poor woman. Let's look now, verses 27 through 30. We'll finish next week. We'll see how Israel responds to this. But let's look at verse 27 through 30 here. And her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. And he said unto her, Up, and let us be going. But none answered. Then the man took her up upon an ass, and the man rose up and gat him unto his place. And when he was come into his house, he took a knife and laid hold on his concubine, and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces, and sent her into all the coasts of Israel. And it was so that all that saw it said, There was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider it, take advice, and speak your minds. The Levite comes out, and don't you think it's kind of heartless? One, after he threw her out for these men to abuse all night long, I'm assuming he slept soundly through the night. He gets up the next morning, he's ready to go, and he opens the door, and she's laying there. He shows no concern for her. Get up. It's time to go. Let's be going. But there's no response. She doesn't answer back. We've got to be careful here, because most commentators will tell you at this point he realizes that she's dead. The Bible doesn't tell us that. Right. We don't know that she's dead at this point. But he picks her up and puts her on the donkey, and they go home. And so if she was dead, you think if he loves her, he's going to give her a nice burial, have a funeral, all the customary things you'd do for somebody you care about? No. He takes his knife and cuts her up into 12 different pieces. Now, if she wasn't dead, the Bible's telling us here now, he killed her in his outrage. Now, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say which one is which, but we can take a look at both possibilities there. I don't know what carrier they used back then to ship body parts around, but he sent these to all 12 tribes of Israel as a message. And maybe he had a written letter or note explaining, what happened and how and stuff. But he's outraged at the men of Gibeah, and he wants the rest of Israel to be outraged. We're going to end here this morning, but his call to consider, to speak up. Why is the church so silent with the chaos that's going on today? Now, I'm not the way, and we'll see next week, this guy's a liar and a fabricator, and because of his actions and his lies, something like 65,000 men die. But one thing he did say here is consider what took place. And this didn't happen in a pagan land. This happened in our land. This happened in our nation. Speak up against this outrage. And his actions had the desired effect. Next week we'll see all Israel rises up. I mean, they're just as outraged now as the Levite was. Something like 400,000 men come to fight. That's how worked up over this outrage they were. And everything in my heart and mind keeps wanting to make an association with this horrific, horrible crime that took place. And how accustomed we have gotten to seeing and hearing horrible, horrific crimes, abuses of people, the unimaginable horror that's taken place on the border with all these young girls and young children coming across and immediately being drugged up and forced into prostitution and sex trafficking and crickets. We're all absolutely silent. We've got nothing to say. There's no outrage or uprising about any of it. But that's next week. Same place, same time. Thank you so much for coming here, being